Ever since I was a little girl, I had received many praises for my voice. People would often call it angelic, blessed, and many other pleasant things whenever they hear me speak or sing. You know how mothers usually sing a lullaby to their children? But my case was different. I was the one who used to sing before we slept. This is not an exaggeration, since my mom had insomnia. The only thing that could make her fall asleep was my singing, whether I sing a nursery rhyme, poem, or song. She often said God gifted me to her to cure her sleeping problems, and I also felt happy singing for her. When I reached the age of 11, my mom passed away in a car crash, and Dad raised me alone after that. He was a good father who always put my needs before his own, and I wanted to do something nice for him once I grew up. I often saw him silently staring at Mom's picture alone in his room. Sometimes there were tears in his eyes, but I never once saw him letting it fall. Some people used to say that the only thing I have is the voice I was born with, and I have no talent except that, which made me feel a bit sad, since it was true. But it was not like I started hating my voice because of their opinion or something. My mom used to tell me that it was ethereal, and she made me love it. So how could I ever dislike my voice just because someone felt insecure about it? Even then, my school life didn't have much difficulty, despite being the girl who didn't talk much. Students and teachers were always nice to me, which made me feel at ease. Well, whether people acknowledge it or not, I did have the talent to copy a song to however it was sung by the original singer. I could copy the high notes, low notes, pitch, rhythm, everything just by listening to it once. That was the reason whenever there was a singing competition, show, or anything that included using voice, teachers would encourage me to do it. People started saying that I should go to the US talent show, America's Got Talent, and show off my otherworldly voice. While their compliments made me feel good, I never thought of actually entering the talent show because I always thought the people were just being generous with their praises. So I never took them seriously. After graduating from high school, I chose psychology in college since I always had an interest in that, and the more I indulged in the subject, the more I found myself drawn toward it. I never thought about what I would do after my master's in psychology, but I did start to learn magic tricks through it. Not that I was thinking of becoming a magician. Now that I'm thinking about it, a psychotherapist might be a good choice. Anyway, I never moved out of the house since it was clear from my dad's condition that he never moved on from Mom's death. He never dated any woman despite being so handsome, and leaving him alone in his misery was not something I could do, so I decided to take care of him. I joined a part-time job at a department store to bring some extra income home apart from Dad's earnings. It was a different case that I did not want him to work anymore, looking at his health falling gradually. But since I knew it would hurt his self-esteem, I never said anything. As his health started to decline more and more, my fear and anxiousness of losing him started to grow. So I decided to do something. I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. That was when I remembered all those compliments about going to America's Got Talent. So I started participating in competitions and talent shows to get an idea of how these competitions work. I was pretty naive back then, so whatever others used to tell me, I would foolishly believe. And since I had no idea how to get into America's Got Talent, I asked around about it. That was when I met a man who told me that he had some connections there, which would help me go through auditions and other procedures smoothly. He also exchanged numbers with me, and since he seemed nice and sweet, I decided to trust his words. I didn't tell Dad about any of this yet, and wanted to surprise him after I get selected, so I started practicing secretly. Then, one day, I got a call from that man, let's call him Jared, telling me that I needed to meet him the next day for a pre-audition process or something, and the way he explained all the details about it convinced me that it must be a real thing. He came to pick me up the next day, and as I was entering his car, my heart was nervously racing, and I started to question if I was not ready yet. Nonetheless, I was still going to do it. He asked me to sit in the front seat beside him, and while lost in my thoughts, I followed his command like a robot. I don't know why I couldn't pick any red flags from him until he started driving, when it was all too obvious. The glances he was stealing from my body were the first thing I noticed, as it was making me feel uneasy. But even at that time, I was thinking it would be rude of him if I asked him to stop that. But when he stopped the car on an empty road, I flinched with perturbation. He then turned to me and gave me a look that resembled those hungry wolves I saw in wildlife documentaries. It was far worse than that. Maintaining eye contact, he leaned on me while I trembled with foreboding. The moment he extended his hand and gripped the hem of my dress, I rummaged my inner courage and pushed him away with all my might. Before he could react, I opened the car door and started running as fast as I could. I thought he would follow me, but luckily he didn't. But still, I was scared, so I ran inside the nearest store I could find. Not knowing what else to do, I called the only person I knew I was safe with, my dad. The moment he had call, I started crying without being able to speak a word, and the part-timer working there was smart enough to take the phone from my hand to ask him to pick me up. After explaining the address, she gave me my phone back and even offered me some tissue with a glass of water. I never told her what happened to me, nor did she ask. But she still somehow understood that whatever it was, I needed her help. Since there weren't many customers at the store to begin with, she continued consoling me till Dad got there. Before going with Dad, I thanked her for everything she did, since she was one of the kindest human beings I ever met. Looking at my trembling body and puffy eyes, he got worried and asked me about what happened. I started telling him everything as he continued driving home with a determination in my mind that I was never going to hide anything from him anymore.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Cut it out! Other people make noises as well, so why are you hanging your sword at my neck all the time? I got frustrated when Mrs. Hubert came to nag me for the 4th time since this morning, all because my dog Penny was barking inside my apartment. Oh, they'll be getting a piece of me too, but the sounds from your apartment are clearer, so it'll be wise for you to stop making noises. I hate it. She was not stopping anytime soon. Having you at my door every minute is not thrilling on my part either, but people live here, Mrs. Hubert. They can't just go on without making a sound. It's not like it's my fault these walls are paper thin. Besides, we all are trying to compromise our best, so why can't you do the same? I could feel the tiredness in my voice as I tried to explain it to her again. But looking at the reaction I was getting from her, all of this just went over her head. After working non-stop for over 10 hours writing a thesis, all I have done in the name of breaks was listen to this old hag's nagging for no particular reason. Penny is a pug, so you can already guess that she doesn't bark much, and even when she does, her voice comes out lighter than other dogs. But the issue with this apartment building is that it is poorly constructed. Waterproofing is to laugh at. Walls are super thin, and there are so many other issues that if I start counting them, the fingers would beg to stop. That's when, even when I walk into my apartment or turn the tap on, she can hear all of this since her apartment is below mine. It's not like I don't face the same issue as her or any other resident doesn't, but like it or not, we all have to live with it due to our circumstances. Even though I do work from home, my work requires a lot of mental and physical energy, and when the cranky old lady is involved, it gets drained more. The only leisure time I get is around 8 p.m. when the show America's Got Talent gets aired, and since watching it not only just boosts my self-esteem, but makes me feel happy as well, I love it. And that is also the time when Mrs. Hubert makes more noise than ever, screaming from below to keep it down. But since I don't want her to ruin the only positive time when I get to look through the hidden talents that might be hidden inside me somewhere, I ignore her completely. A few days passed, and this twisted routine continued, and it was finally the day when I had to go and submit my thesis personally. At first, I was scheduled to do it online, but my professor told me he wanted to take a look before it gets published, so I headed there. Discussing the piece with him and making a few minor adjustments before giving it for publication took the entire day, and by the time I got back, I was exhausted. But I was still looking forward to the new episode that was going to air tonight on the talent show. There was going to be a contestant who was going to perform some magic tricks, and looking at how I was a big fan of magic ever since I was a child, I couldn't wait for the clock to strike 8. "Oh, hey, Cora, where are you coming from?" It was my neighbor, Ellie. She lived on the same floor as me and was much nicer than others. "Just some work stuff. Where are you headed off to?" I asked. "To the grocery store. Want to come?" And before I could deny her invitation, she grabbed my hand and started walking to the exit. "Well, I guess I could buy some tofu while I am there," thinking while I accompanied her. I ended up buying more than just tofu, even more stuff than Ellie, as I realized upon reaching the store that I was short on many things. Well, I wasn't surprised by this outcome, since I rarely leave the apartment to do anything, and whenever I'm out of groceries, I just order them online. She helped me carry them to my apartment, and in return for her kindness, I asked her to stay for a cup of coffee, which she agreed to. "I don't see Penny anywhere. Did Naomi take her to her place?" she asked, looking around, and it made me realize she didn't come to greet me at the door either. She must be around here somewhere. It sometimes happens when she's sleeping or watching squirrels through the bedroom window, so I didn't think much of it. After Ellie left, I started looking for Penny around the house, and when I couldn't find her, I thought she might have gotten out somehow. I spent hours looking around the apartment building and went to search each floor, but she was nowhere to be found. She couldn't have gone off outside the building since she was scared of places with many people. So if she wasn't in the building, that meant someone took her. But who? I called my sister and asked if she dropped by to take her, but Naomi refused, saying she was at work all day. It was perturbing to the point where I started going door to door at each apartment asking if they had seen Penny or if she accidentally walked inside any of their apartments. But as I looked high and low for her without any success, disconcert grew along with a sense of trepidation that something had happened to her. I loved her as my child, and the thought that someone might have taken her was dreadful. As I returned to my apartment after spending hours looking for her, the only thing I did was hope that she returned on her own if she was hiding somewhere. I didn't have the heart to do anything more, so I sat on the couch with my head between my knees. Tears started to fall, and I couldn't stop wailing. Surprisingly enough, Mrs. Hubert didn't scream or nag even once today. It was as if she wasn't even there, and that was when I remembered that it could have been her who did it. But she didn't have the keys to my house. I could not just go and accuse her of kidnapping my dog. Still, I had to do something, so thinking of asking her politely, I went to the floor below mine, only to find her apartment door locked from the outside. I returned in disappointment, since she was my last hope, and if she didn't have her, then I didn't know where to find her. As I was still trying to look in every corner of my house, hoping to find her, someone started banging on my door loudly, but instead of getting disturbed this time, I ran to open it thinking it could be Mrs. Hubert, who might have come to return Penny. But when I opened the door, there was no one outside. Instead, there was a carton box with a note on it. I picked it up and read, "I told you to keep it down." As I read the note, it made me very apprehensive about opening the box, but I still squat down and opened it with trembling hands. A loud, blood-chilled scream escaped my throat and echoed throughout the floor as I fell back horror-stricken upon seeing my Penny's body, with her head smashed so inhumanely. Residents from the apartment came out and saw me shaking in my shoes with horrified expressions. Ellie rushed to my side, but as she saw what was in front of me, she backed away, only to throw up from the sight. I didn't want my Penny's death to become a show, so I took her inside and started crying, bawling my eyes out. That night, I spent crying and wondering who might have done such a thing, and if it was the old lady below me, since she was the only one I could suspect who had a problem with me. But even if she did do it, no one would ever believe me. I managed to bury her body next morning and informed Naomi of her death, which made her devastated. She started crying. There was no way I could live in that place any longer, so I asked my sister if I could move to her place for a few days until I find a new apartment within budget. She wholeheartedly welcomed me, and within a week or so, I moved out of this wretched apartment. I don't want to think about those painful memories any longer, and since I don't want any other innocent animal to go through the same, I didn't bring any more pets, nor am I planning of doing so in the future.
I was abducted at the age of 8 by a sadist man named Luca, and I've been living as his sex and torture slave since then. The day I was abducted, I was playing in the park when he came to me and started to talk with me nicely. He told me his daughter, who could not walk, was in his car and asked me if I would like to play with her. He asked me to follow him, and I thought he was a good person, so I followed him. Big mistake, right? Yes, I know that now, but I was 8 back then. I know at that age we all have been immature, but always acted like we were mature enough to differentiate between good and bad. I followed him while talking to him as soon as we reached the car. He put a handkerchief over my nose, and I passed out. When I woke up, I was in a huge room, and that man was sitting beside me and staring. I started crying and asking him to let me go home, but he slapped me hard and told me to keep my mouth shut or he would kill me. I was terrified, so I followed his command like a scared puppy. He looked at me lustfully while smiling like a monster, which terrified me even more. After that, he came closer and tore my clothes. I did not know what was happening to me, but I was so scared that he was going to kill me, so I kept quiet and sobbed silently. But then he started doing something to me which was painful as hell. I started to bleed, and I thought I was going to die. I kept screaming, but the monster did not stop, and I passed out eventually. When I woke up, I was alone in the room, and my entire body was hurting like crazy. I tried to get up, but I felt dizzy and fell. I was feeling a sharp pain in the lower half of my body, and I was unable to move. I thought I was going to die back then when I thought he was trying to kill me, but I guessed that I may have survived somehow. After that, I started to think about how to run from there. But as I was unable to move my body, I kept lying on the bed while thinking. All I could think was to hide somewhere. But then the man came back. He looked at me and without saying anything, pulled out a small iron rod. He beat my legs over and over again until they started to bleed. And then when he was done, he said, "I know you must be thinking of running away, but now you won't be able to. From this, you won't be able to move for a few days." After that, he did the same thing as before to hurt me and continued doing it day after day. It's been years, and I am stuck in this hellhole, unable to run from him. He makes me do chores, beats me up with different tools each time, and rapes me continuously. A new reality television show has been aired these days, Power Slap, which he watches every night. He makes me sit with him and watch them together. The contestants slap each other continuously until one of them wins. Sometimes they are even knocked out by this. As I just told you, he makes me sit with him to watch, which what I meant by that is that the psycho not only watches Power Slap, but performs it on me while watching the show until I am knocked out each time. And if I try to block him in the process, he starts to kick me and tell me not to do that. As a result, I am continuously in pain throughout the day, and I started to have several concussions, but he doesn't care. Today was the 7th day in a row that he called me to watch that sick show Power Slap with him. I was trembling the entire time sitting there while he kept hitting me. With the last slap, I was knocked out unconscious, and then I woke up while he was standing over me with a packet in his hands, staring at my belly annoyingly. He handed me the thing and left after telling me what to do. It was a pregnancy test. I was supposed to pee on it, and if 2 pink lines were to show in there, I was to immediately tell him about it. I figured 2 pink lines mean pregnancy. I was hoping for it to be negative while taking it because I did not want my child to suffer the same fate as me. But my prayers went into vain when another pink line got visible after the one. I started to panic. If I were to tell him, he would take the child away from me and go through these things with the child as well. I was called by him and figured that it was time for Power Slap. I had decided what to do and how to save my child from suffering the same fate as me. So I quietly went there and I was walking and I saw his back. He was sitting on the sofa watching the show. I moved there without making a noise and stood behind him. As he was about to turn, I slapped him in the back of the neck with a knife that I brought from the kitchen. His eyes popped out in vain, and he died while looking straight into my eyes. I never knew it was this easy to get rid of him. If I knew, I would have done this earlier, but I guess I wasn't brave enough. Thank God that this pregnancy changed me in a good way, enough to remove all the problems away from my future child's life. I turned my head toward the television. The Power Slap's 8th episode was streaming. I sat next to his dead body, turned his face toward the television, and said, "You should see the final episode to find out who won."
This story happened when I was 15. It's been almost an entire decade now, but I still think about it quite a lot. This is our situation. My brothers and I live with my mom. I'm the oldest of 3, and my mom generally leaned on me to get things done. This naturally turned me into an adult from a very early age. Even to this day, my mom talks about feeling guilty for having to thrust adulthood on me so early on. She thinks that I didn't have a childhood, and maybe she's right. As you might imagine, my dad wasn't really in the picture. He was an abusive drunk, and when I say abusive, I mean seriously abusive. Up until the time I was 10, he lived with us, and whenever he would get drunk, he would beat the life out of us. It was always terrifying. The only saving grace was the fact that he wasn't always drunk or had alcohol in the house. In fact, there were sometimes, months at a time, when he would go without drinking, and he was an otherwise pretty decent person. For all that was wrong with my dad, he would have probably been close to an ideal human being if he had not been for his rampant alcoholism and the demon inside of him that came out when he got drunk. The incident that got my mom to finally divorce him was horrendous. I had been in my room playing video games or something, and he was in the living room. My mom just got home from getting the groceries. He accused her of having an affair at the time, and of course, this wasn't true, but he didn't believe it. He kept screaming at her that she was lying. It escalated to the point that he pinned her down on the floor and said that he saw her nose growing, and then grabbed a screwdriver and cut into my mom's nose with it. There's still a scar from that day. Well, that all went down when I was about 10, so this is about 5 years later. My mom was bringing my 2 younger brothers on some kind of Boy Scout trip. They were both in the Boy Scouts and always felt left out because all the other kids had a dad. My mom's guilt drove her to volunteer and help out whenever she could, so she went with my 2 brothers for this weekend camping trip with the Boy Scouts. She really wanted me to go with them because she felt uncomfortable having me alone in the house. I insisted that I was mature enough to do it, and honestly, I didn't even have friends that I could party with if I wanted to. She eventually gave in and let me have my way. I remember being in my bedroom, playing with my PlayStation. It was a pretty typical Saturday afternoon, but then I heard a car pull up. I didn't know who it was at first, and I immediately got really panicked that I was going to have to call the cops. My bedroom window doesn't have a really good view at the driveway, so it took me a second, but after studying the part of the car that I could see, I recognized that it was my father's car. I was immediately mortified. I was on bad terms with him, and my mom had a really serious restraining order put on him after they had separated. I got really nervous, and I was not sure what I should even do. He didn't come into the house for a few minutes, and I immediately started wondering what he was up to. I did the only thing that I could think of and cracked my window so I could hear what was going on outside. I thought that if I could hear what he was doing, I would have a better idea. I immediately recognized that he was crying. His whimpering sound was really intense. I hadn't heard from him in years, and my mom said that we would never see him again. But here he was, crying in our driveway. He paced around for a few minutes before finally standing still. I could hear his crying getting louder. Then he screamed. All I heard was a gunshot. The second I heard the gunshot, I immediately knew what had happened. I ran outside. I looked down at my father's lifeless body on the driveway cement. Blood everywhere. As traumatic as it may have been, I didn't cry. I didn't act emotional or anything. I just called the police. They got there a few minutes later and took me into custody. They wanted to keep me safe and secure until they could contact my mom. The rest of the story played out exactly as you would imagine. My mom apologized profusely. I had to answer some questions to the police. Nothing out of the ordinary. I don't really know what to make of the situation. I don't have much sympathy for the guy, and part of me is kind of happy that he did it. But looking back, I just kind of wish that he had done it where I wouldn't have had to have witnessed it. The entire experience made me never want to go stay home by myself ever again. It's been a long time since this whole thing had gone down, and even now, if I have to stay home by myself, I will make an effort to leave the house or to invite a friend over. I won't stay there alone. A couple of years have passed since this entire situation, and I can't help but to think that it was all for the better. My dad was a seriously destructive human being, and I know this might sound terrible, but I just wish that he had done it sooner. For those out there that haven't lived with a toxic and negative parental figure, consider yourself extremely lucky. The tribulations that I had to endure at the hands of my father fostered a lot of rage inside of me.